This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. Right now, I'm in the middle of a three-part series of MTG Top 10s that look at creature types. Last time we looked at the most and least common creature types in the game, and this time we're going to look at the worst creature types. This is a list composed using objective data, with the 10 creature types on this list being the 10 that have had the least success at Magic's highest levels of play. My methodology for this type of video is a little bit different than how I usually do things, since I'm looking at groups of cards instead of individual cards. If you saw my MTG Top 10s from a couple of weeks ago on the best and worst mechanics, the methodology here is the same. To start with, I use the same scoring system that I use in my typical MTG Top 10s. That is, that each card gets 2 points for every Pro Tour, Mythic Championship, Legacy, and Vintage Championship Top 8, and 1 point for each Grand Prix Top 8. I calculated the scores for all the cards in each creature type, and then divide that score by the number of points with that creature type to come up with the primary metric I use to rank these cards: points per card. This method means that any creature type that has one card with a lot of success or several cards with moderate success can't make a list like this. As we will see, the creature types to make this list have had only a very small number of cards achieve very minor success. In addition to this methodology, there was also one criterion that each creature type had to achieve to be considered for that list. Each creature type had to have a minimum of 25 combined cards that either have that creature type or make creature tokens with that creature type. I think this is a good number because anything with fewer cards than that hasn't really been given enough opportunities to really succeed. Alright, with all that methodology talk out of the way, let's look at the 10th worst creature type in all of Magic, which is Samurai. The signature mechanic of the Samurai creature type, Bushido, only narrowly missed making it on the worst mechanics list, coming in at number 11. So far, Samurai have only appeared in the Japanese-inspired Kamigawa block, and the vast majority of the ones that are there are pretty terrible. Wizards really thought that Bushido would be a lot better than it was because the majority of Samurais have way too high of a casting cost for them to ever be considered remotely playable. Numai Outcast is a great example of this, and a card that many people consider to be one of the worst creatures ever printed. A 4-mana 1/1 is terrible, and sure it has Bushido too, but that still means this thing only grows to a 3/3 when it blocks or becomes blocked. Offensively, your opponent will just take one from your incredibly inefficient creature, and if you want to use the Outcast on defense, it does get slightly better, but it is still only a 4-mana 3/3 blocker, which is horrendous. And yeah, sure, it can regenerate, but for a cost of 5 life and 1 black mana. That's pretty steep, and keeping this alive probably isn't even worth it. Almost all Samurai fall into this category of being overcosted, but there are 3 who found some moderate success that allowed Samurai to avoid coming in higher on this list, and they also helped Bushido avoid coming in on the worst mechanic list. They are Hand of Cruelty, Kitsune Blademaster, and Samurai of the Pale Curtain. These are good exemplars of how to design successful cards with Bushido in the future, as they are all reasonably efficient without the mechanic, so adding it to them is some significant upside. If we ever return to Kamigawa, it's likely we'll see Samurai again. It will be interesting to see if they can get themselves off of this list, but for now, this is the 10th worst creature type in the game. And number 9 is Crab. Crab is mostly a creature type that has been used for common blue creatures with high toughness that are usually even mediocre and limited. This has pretty much been the case for a couple of decades at this point. There are 2 Crabs who have found some modest success: Hedron Crab, whose ability to mill libraries is great in self-milling dredge decks, and the more recent card Growth Chamber Guardian, who is an efficient creature that can make himself larger while searching your library for another copy. If it weren't for the recent success of Growth Chamber Guardian, Crabs would probably end up even higher on this list. There were actually several new Crabs released in Ravnica Allegiance, as the Simic seem to have started to like splicing their DNA with that of Crabs. In addition to the Guardian, Shark to Crab seems like it might have a chance to help get Crabs off of this list, but for now they have only 0.296 points per card. At number 8 is Cyclops, which suffers from a problem similar to the Crab creature type. While Crabs are sort of the stock defensive common creature, Cyclopes are the stock big dumb red creature at a lower rarity. Cyclops of the One-Eyed Pass is pretty representative of Cyclopes in the game as a whole. There have been 2 Cyclopes that have known some success though. One of these is Polis Crusher, an efficient creature with protection from enchantments, as well as the ability to become even larger and blow up an enchantment. The other is Boborigmos Enraged, who works as a useful combo piece in decks that can load their hands with lands with things like Life from the Loam. Still, neither of these cards has exactly been a consistent performer, and they both just have very few points. They just haven't done enough to keep Cyclops off of this list. At number 7 is Ogre, the most common creature type to make it onto the list with 89 different ogres out there. Ogres appear the most in black and red, and like Cyclops, it isn't exactly an interesting creature type with clearly defined characteristics in terms of design. They fill a role similar to the Cyclops, just being a black or red creature that isn't especially impressive and is pretty shrug-worthy even in limited. Indentured Oaf is a pretty good representative of what makes ogres bad. On the whole, they are kind of efficient but come with huge downsides. There are several ogres that are just inefficient vanilla creatures too. Pushed ogres very rarely show up in this game, but there are a few of them. Savage Knuckleblade is a nice aggressive creature with tons of activated abilities. Rurik Thar is a great way to punish control decks. And more recently, Ogre Spellbreaker is both an aggressive card and one that can punish control. If it weren't for Spellbreaker's recent success, Ogres would have ended up even higher up on this list. Maybe it will continue to see play and help Ogres find their way off of this top 10. At number 6 we have Barbarian, which used to be a reasonably supported creature type, but we haven't seen it in a very long time at this point. They used to appear in red with some regularity, but the last time we have seen them was in our first trip to Ravnica. They were especially plentiful in Odyssey block, where the creature type even received a Lord in Balthor the Stout. Balthor isn't even really played much in EDH, with only 18 decks on EDH Rec using him as a general. So, how is it that even with a Lord, Barbarians have never really performed? Well, as you might expect, the majority of them just aren't very good. Cards like Barbarian Outcast and Partick Lancer don't make you eager to sleeve up a Barbarian deck. The best of all the Barbarians is probably Undead Gladiator, who combines the cycling mechanic with the ability to return to your hand, while also having pretty high power for 3 mana, allowing him to trade and come back. If they had chosen to continue to support the creature type with some consistency, maybe Barbarians could have made a comeback, and maybe we'll see them on a future plane. But for now, it's one of the worst creature types around. At number 5 I have Scarecrow. Scarecrows are pretty much exclusively an artifact creature type, and they receive some considerable support back in Lorwyn block, but most of them are pretty terrible. They tend to be especially interested in the colors of permanence, but most of their abilities that deal with this are pretty bad, and they are usually just hugely inefficient creatures. Blazethorn Scarecrow is a good example of this. It's hugely inefficient even if you do jump through hoops to get extra keywords on it, and that is true of tons of Scarecrows. Scarecrows have even received a bit of tribal support with cards like Reaper King and Scarecrow, but it doesn't matter if you have good payoffs for the creature type, if most of the cards with that type are just bad. There is, of course, one Scarecrow who breaks free of this mold, the only Scarecrow in the history of the game with any points, and that's Painter's Servant, who can combine with Grindstone for an instant win combo. This combo has been the most successful in Legacy, but hasn't actually done a whole lot in several years. If Painter's Servant can find some more success, though, maybe he can single-handedly get Scarecrows off of this list. At number 4 we have Mercenary, which like Samurai is a creature type whose very design made them inherently weak. Mercenaries actually received a lot of tribal support when they debuted in Prophecy block, with many mercenaries, like Wrathy Fiend, coming with a recruit ability that lets you put another mercenary into play from your deck, which is a pretty sweet payoff for playing a bunch of mercenaries, right? Well, maybe I guess, but when you compare mercenaries in the Masks block to the Rebels of Masks block, you can see that they are at a distinct disadvantage. In what has to be one of the lazier designs ever put out there by R&D, Mercenaries and Rebels both have similar recruit themes, being functionally similar in a whole lot of ways, except that Mercenaries are just worse. Mercenaries can only search for creatures with a lower converted mana cost than their own, while Rebels get to search for cards with a converted mana cost that is 1 higher or less. Defiant Falcon and Bogglider do a great job of conveying this huge gap in power level. Both have the same stats in flying and the ability to recruit a creature, but the Falcon costs 1 less, and it can recruit stuff with a higher converted mana cost than its own. Meanwhile, Bogglider has to sacrifice a land to do it, and can only get something with a lower converted mana cost than its own. This all made Mercenaries inherently bad, especially compared to Rebels, who, by the way, were utterly dominant in Masks block constructed, showing you how a very small tweak like this one can lead to some serious lack of balance in a format. Rebels were so much better than Mercenaries, and the two were supposed to be rivals. There are 2 Mercenaries who found some slight success. One of these was Rebel Informer, who was a good sideboard card against the dominant Rebel decks, and the other was Doomed Necromancer, who's good at reanimating stuff, and who honestly doesn't feel like much of a mercenary at all. Mercenary is a creature type that we probably won't see come back, because the design is both uninteresting and not very powerful, which is never a good combination. I don't think Mercenary will ever find its way off of this list. At number 3 is Griffin, the creature type to make the list that most surprised me. Griffins are predominantly white and blue, and they always have flying, so surely some have been good enough to see a bit of play, right? Well, not really. While there have been lots of Griffins over the years that are decent and limited, there hasn't ever really been one that was really pushed for constructed play, with most of them priced out of range in terms of mana cost. In fact, not a single creature with the Griffin type has put up a point. However, one card that makes Griffin tokens has, and that's Griffin Guide, which offers a pretty nice stats boost to your creature, and makes sure that even if your opponent finds a way to kill the enchanted creature, you get a Griffin token. Other Griffins are usually fairly uninteresting and underpowered, like Setessan Griffin, who offers something other than just being a flying creature, but it is so inefficient that it doesn't really matter. The weirdest thing about all of this is that Griffins were actually one of the first creature types to receive tribal support after creature types like merfolk, goblins, and zombies. Way back in Mirage Block, Zuberi Golden Feather and Griffin Canyon gave you reasons to play Griffins, but since then, Griffins have never really received that treatment again, and these days, they're just middling draft commons most of the time when we see them. And at number 2 is Fungus, which I think is probably the creature type to make the list that people will be the most upset about. But I think Fungus is a creature type that is a lot like Samurai and Mercenary in that their inherent design doesn't make them particularly good. Creatures with the Fungus creature type in Magic generally do stuff with spore counters that get added to them every turn. That can involve creating saplings like Thallid here. The problem with this type of design is that most fungi need 3 spore counters before they can do anything, and playing a largely inefficient creature who, if it survives, might give you a 1/1 sapling 3 turns later isn't anything special. In our return to Dominaria, we got some fungi who still like saplings but are better at doing stuff with them, like Slimefoot the Stowaway. But this recent increase in fungus power hasn't done much to improve them collectively. The 2 fungi that have seen some success are Mold Shambler and Mycoloth. Not surprisingly, neither of them do anything with spore counters. And at number 1 is Serpent, which I think is the worst creature type in the entire game. Of the 97 creature types that were eligible for this list, Serpent is the only one that comes in at 0 points per card, which is a dubious honor for sure. Serpent is another creature type that has a design that is inherently bad. The vast majority of them ask you, or even worse, your opponent, to do something for them to actually be able to attack. The majority of the time, this involves islands, which is admittedly quite flavorful for these sea-bound monsters. The worst of the Serpents are those that can only attack if something you can't control happens, like your opponent having an island in play. This might be a little more interesting if Serpents were more aggressively costed, but usually they just do kind of okay on the vanilla test, so asking for such a big requirement to be fulfilled in order for them to be able to attack is pretty terrible. Sea Monster is probably the best example of this, and most other Serpents ask for similar requirements. In recent years, we have started to see Serpents that are at least pretty good and limited, like Gearseeker Serpent and Cryptic Serpent, so it does seem like Wizards has decided they don't always need to put some restriction on the ability of Serpents to attack, which could mean that at some point soon, the Serpent can escape from being the only creature type with 25 or more cards that comes in at 0 points per card. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. On Wednesday, we will complete this 3-part series by looking at the best creature types in the game. In the comments, let me know what you think the best creature type in the game is. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.